This is ILTV on the hour, bringing you the biggest stories from Israel and the Middle East in just 5 minutes. I'm Shosh Bedrosian, and today is day 633 of the war in Gaza. Let's get into all the top headlines at this hour. We begin with the new comments. Netanyahu is now saying that new opportunities are rising after the ceasefire deal with Iran was established. While meeting officials at Shin Bet facility in the south of Israel, the Prime Minister said, first and foremost, to rescue the hostages, and then going on to say to resolve the issue in Gaza and defeat Hamas. Netanyahu's critics say it's the first time since October 7th the Prime Minister placed the release of the hostages as the government's top priority above the defeat of Hamas. And as momentum and pressure continues to grow for a ceasefire and hostage deal, Netanyahu used the word rescue instead of the word release while speaking about the hostages. Here's what else he had to say.
צריך לפתור גם את עניין עזה, להכריע את החמאס, אבל אני מעריך שאנחנו נשיג את שתי המשימות. אבל מעבר לזה נפתחות אפשרויות אזוריות רחבות, שבחלק מהם, בעצם כמעט בכולם אתם שותפים.
And the Hostages Family Forum responding to that, saying, quote, the families of the hostages welcomes the fact that after 20 months, the return of the hostages has finally been designated as the top priority by the Prime Minister. Meanwhile, their statement goes on to say, quote, it is crucial to emphasize that what is needed is release, not rescue. The difference of one word would mean the difference between salvation and loss for the hostages. Now, the families of hostages and released hostages have long warned and feared that any military action to rescue living hostages could result in their deaths. Netanyahu's comments come after President Trump made remarks a ceasefire deal could come within the next week, and after Trump took to Truth Social to say, quote, make the deal in Gaza, get the hostages back. Now, it's unclear at this time if progress has been made for a possible ceasefire deal, as there's been no updates if a team of Israeli negotiators plans on going to Egypt or Qatar soon. As Israel pushes for the dismantling and disarming of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, the terror group continues to push back from recent negotiations. Despite officials saying Hamas is weakened, they still control the Gaza Strip. And turning to the war in Gaza, after the IDF issued large evacuation orders in northern Gaza this week, Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz and IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir held high-level discussions yesterday to evaluate next steps in Gaza that could include a potential move forward towards a wider military operation if the hostage negotiations fail, which would result in a breakthrough to end or pause the war in Gaza. Within the IDF, there's an ongoing debate about whether to press forward in Gaza or declare that the war's main objectives were achieved, including the destruction of Hamas military infrastructure and senior commanders, and the dismantling of tunnels, weapons systems, and the seizure of over half of the territory. And meanwhile, violence in Judea and Samaria is once again making headlines, this time not between Israelis and Palestinians, but between extremist Jewish residents and Israeli soldiers. Now, tensions in the area reached a boiling point over the weekend, culminating in violent clashes between a fringe group of settlers and Israeli security forces. The violence began Wednesday in a Palestinian village when dozens of Jewish residents of the area reportedly rampaged it. 3 Palestinians were killed, 7 were injured, and property was torched. The IDF said it responded to armed fire from Palestinian gunmen. And then on Friday night, tensions escalated again. The military says a group of Judea and Samaria residents returned back to that village and were met by IDF forces trying to prevent further violence. What followed was a rare confrontation between settlers and soldiers. Troops were attacked with stones. 1 battalion commander was beaten. Vehicles were vandalized, and 6 suspects were arrested. A 14-year-old settler was shot and wounded. The IDF said an officer had fired into the air in accordance with protocol, unaware the stone throwers were masked Jewish teens. But leaders across the political spectrum, Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Israel Katz, and IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir issued strong condemnation. All emphasized that violence against IDF soldiers will not be tolerated. They say, quote, this is a small minority. As he stressed in a statement, they do not represent the vast majority of settlers who are law-abiding citizens and serve proudly in the IDF. And moving on to what's happening in Europe, take a listen to these anti-Israel chants.
Free, free! free, free. Alright, but have you heard this one though? Death, death to the IDF. 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 Hell yeah, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be, will be.
You are looking at the Glastonbury Festival, where police say they are now looking into the anti-Israel chants by performers Bob Vylan and Kneecap at this year's Glastonbury Festival, which was broadcasted live on the BBC and said by tens of thousands of people, many of whom who actually joined in on the chants. And like we said, those chants included anti-Israel chants. The police say, quote, it raises serious concerns about the normalization of extremist language and the glorification of violence. The Israeli embassy in the UK also said they were deeply disturbed, calling the chants and actions by the performers inflammatory and hateful. The Glastonbury Festival also said in a statement they were appalled by Vylan's remarks, saying there was no place at the festival for anti-Semitism, hate speech, or incitement to violence. Here's what one concert goer had to say. Seems as if we don't have that soundbite, but members of the Irish group Kneecap also chanted Free Palestine. And just recently, a member of that group was actually charged with a terror offense for displaying a Hezbollah flag on a set in London, which is an Iranian-backed terror organization inside of Lebanon. You're taking a look at that festival site right now. You can see the Palestinian flags all over the place, green smoke in the air as well. Thousands of people attend this festival every single year. You can just see how many people were there. And now joining us to discuss the latest is Dan Pfefferman, a Middle East analyst. Dan, thanks so much for being with us today. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Thanks so much for being with us. Now, I want to start by asking you, what did you think of Netanyahu's comments that were made overnight, specifically about rescuing the hostages? It's a very specific word he used. Instead of the word release, he used the word rescue.
Yeah, it seems to me that the pressure on the Israeli government, specifically on Netanyahu and his coalition from the White House, from President Trump, to wrap up this war is getting stronger and stronger. I think the military opinion, the opinion of defense experts in the United States is also saying there's not much more to be gained by the ground operation that's currently taking place without risking the hostages' lives. And you have this potential of diplomatic achievements that lies just around the way, especially this is what President Trump, this is what the Saudis and the Syrians or others are trying to push right now. And so they need to be able to wrap up this war. The problem is Hamas. Hamas doesn't want to admit defeat. And so it looks like Netanyahu is changing the communication strategy. And for the first time that we've seen in 633 days, prioritizing releasing the hostages and using a language of rescuing them instead of releasing them, likely to be able to make shifts to the strategy, even if the result on the ground will look more like a ceasefire than an actual official win to this war.
Right. Interesting perspective there. I think a lot of people don't realize necessarily that the words that these officials use in public, they really carry so much weight. And like you said, it could be playing to some type of strategy. In your opinion, how realistic is a deal at this point? You know, we've had officials say Hamas is weakened, but we also know that Hamas is not completely weakened, right? They still run the Gaza Strip.
Well, they do and they don't. Hamas is really all but defeated. It controls very few parts of Gaza at this point. The GHF aid mechanism that really was implemented to bypass Hamas and its control over Gaza, over the citizens of Gaza via the aid mechanism seems to be having a decent effect, even if it's not in its entirety. The problem is Hamas has shown, certainly the Hamas leadership in the Gaza Strip has shown that it's willing to sacrifice every last Gazan civilian. It's willing to make the people of Gaza suffer so that it can remain in power on the day when the fighting ceases in one way or another and claim a victory. There do seem to be splits in the leadership within Gaza between the Gaza Hamas leadership and the foreign Hamas leadership. These splits are emerging as more and more senior Hamas leaders in Gaza have been killed or neutralized in the past months of fighting. The pressure does grow on them. And so the big question is, will Hamas capitulate or will the Trump administration pressure Israel to accept some kind of ceasefire? In either case, it is absolutely clear, and the Arab countries, especially the Saudis, have made clear, there is going to be no reconstruction of Gaza so long as Hamas is in power. And so I think we're going to need to see a mechanism that gets the Hamas leadership out of Gaza into exile, and then the reconstruction and transformation of Gaza can finally begin.
Now, Dan, you brought up an interesting point about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. I want to bring our viewers into a little bit of an update that we are hearing from them. They mentioned today, actually, their workers on the ground received credible threats by Hamas. They actually released a statement that said, according to reports, quote, Hamas has placed bounties on both our American security personnel and Palestinian aid workers, offering cash rewards to anyone who injures or kills them. In recent days, Hamas has also pre-positioned armed operatives near humanitarian zones in an effort to disrupt the only functioning aid delivery system in Gaza. We know videos also emerged of certain types of armed groups taking some of this humanitarian aid. It seems as if there was some type of pause even the other day from Israel trying to figure out how they can stop Hamas from stealing this aid. What is your take on that, just from what GHF is saying in terms of what is happening to their personnel on the ground, trying to deliver this very critical aid to these Palestinians that are absolutely suffering right now?
Yeah, I mean, that just goes to show that the strategy of bypassing Hamas in the aid mechanism, the whole strategy of the GHF, as flawed as the implementation may be, and it is messy, it is a war zone, and you do have a lot of very hungry people in a state of chaos, it is the correct strategy. And you see how desperate Hamas is to use threats of violence. It has actually killed multiple members of the GHF. It is planting, it seems that it's planting Hamas operatives near these aid location sites and shooting Palestinians in order to be able to blame IDF troops on that. And so it seems that this is a strategy that is working. It is pressuring Hamas, and Hamas is increasingly growing desperate. I think it's important to keep our eyes on the ball, so to speak, here with this mechanism, to double down on it, because the pressure on Hamas keeps growing. And the best deal that we as Israel, we as kind of the regional moderate community, the moderate bloc here can get, is to grow the pressure to a point where Hamas leaders accept exile and disarmament in exchange for their lives, essentially. And then again, you can have some kind of moderate coalition of Arab states that take over Gaza, and the IDF can get out. This would be the biggest win-win possible. I think the worst case scenario that we are preparing for, according to Netanyahu's comments that you aired earlier, are some kind of twisting of the communications, that this is going to be a rescue of the hostages rather than a release. But in a sense, it would be capitulating more to the ceasefire demands that Hamas is insisting on currently.
I want to ask you just about what you said, the rescue word that Netanyahu used last night. Is it possible? How realistic is it to actually rescue some of these living hostages at this point? We know that Israel believes that 20 of them are alive, many of them held in tunnels. How likely is it a rescue could happen?
That's been the challenge the entire time, is that every time, and apparently from intelligence sources, we do know where a lot of these hostages are. It's just when we get too close, their lives become in danger. There was, of course, the tragic incident where 6 of the hostages were executed as IDF soldiers were within a kilometer or even less of reaching them. And so that is the case. However, in wartime, when things are changing so rapidly, when Iran is now in such a weak point, when Hezbollah is at its weakest point ever, when Syria is no longer a Hamas ally and supporter, the entire regional context has changed. Israel controls the Philadelphia corridor, the main smuggling route between Egypt and Gaza. And so the entire regional dynamic has changed. And so who knows if the actual Hamas operatives, or even if they're not Hamas, who are holding these hostages, might find a way again to save their own skin in exchange for the hostages. It seems to me unlikely that the IDF would be able to actually rescue these hostages in commando operations. However, anything is really possible at this time, and things seem to be changing quite rapidly on the ground.
Right. We know that this momentum seems to be building from this ceasefire deal that was established between Israel and Iran. It seems like there's definitely regional pressure to also simmer this war and to get it to some type of end. Dan, thanks so much for being with us today.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
And as we reported before, we know that there is violence that's currently ongoing inside of the West Bank. Joining me now to discuss that is Lieutenant Colonel Reserve Advocate Maurice Hirsch. Maurice, he was the former head of military prosecution for Judea and Samaria. Thanks so much for being with us today. First, I want to talk about the violence that is happening inside of the West Bank. What can you tell us about the situation that's ongoing there?
So what we've seen really in the last few days is an escalation of a fringe group of people. I don't think we can even call them settlers, because they're not only settlers, they're also people who have come from within the Green Line and have just come to cause trouble. They've come there to disrupt Judea and Samaria. They've come to disrupt the lives of the 650,000, 700,000 law-abiding settlers such as myself, and really it's an experience which we all as a community, as an entire population of Judea and Samaria, reject their violence. Their violence doesn't speak for us. It doesn't promote anything that we're trying to promote, and we are calling on the army to do as much as they can as well in order to ensure that justice is done, that the law is enforced against these people. They must be arrested and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. They're not only disrupting our lives, they are disrupting the lives of our Palestinian neighbors, and they are blackening the name of Israel in the international forums.
You mentioned a fringe group. What does fringe mean? Like what are their belief systems? What do they align themselves with? How do they differ from the other people that live inside of the West Bank and work towards peace within the Palestinian neighbors that are there?
So as you have in any society, you have got groups of people who believe that violence is a method in order to promote their political goals. It's not even clear exactly what their political goals are. They're not clearly trying to push all of the Palestinians out. They're not trying to defend Israel's presence. They're not trying to defend Israel's ancestral homeland. They're there to just cause trouble. Now, some of these people are what's called the Na'arei Agvot, the children of the hills. These are people who, unfortunately, in Israel is a very technological society. We promote studies in maths, in high tech, in sciences, and some of the population need to be doing other things. They want to be shepherds. They want to be car mechanics. They want to be plumbers. And it's often the case that, unfortunately, those educational environments don't necessarily exist and are being constantly cut back. And so those children find themselves without a framework to be in, running away from home, finding themselves under the influence of all types of unsavory characters who are promoting this violence. And the result is that they are getting involved in acts of terrorism. Let's call it by its name. This is terrorism. That really should be rejected by all of Israeli society, and starting with, obviously, with the settlers. And that is indeed the case. It's hard to put an exact pinpoint on what their ideology is. As I said, it's not clear. Some of them are anti the state of Israel. They want to bring about the kingdom of Judea. That was one of these groups in the past. So really pigeonholing them to one group or another is quite difficult.
Right. Specifically, I want to talk about the violence between these settlers, this fringe group of settlers, and the IDF specifically. How common is something like that to actually happen, for this violence to be perpetuated against the Israeli military inside of the West Bank?
So I have to say that is quite uncommon. The numbers of the children and the members of the settlements that serve in the IDF is exceptionally high, is much higher than in relative terms to the rest or most of the rest of the country as well. And so when you have these people now attacking the IDF soldiers, who many of them live in the settlements, they are the children of settlers, they are settlers themselves, and suddenly you have that violence against them from people who are meant to be on our side. They're meant to be together with us. They're meant to be together with the IDF fighting against a common enemy. And suddenly we find them fighting against us. Unfortunately, this starts, and here it has to be clear, it's an unfortunate statement, but I have to say it anyway. It starts with insufficient law enforcement against these terrorists when they are attacking Palestinians. And thereafter, when we find ourselves in a situation where they're now attacking soldiers, we have first and foremost ourselves to blame, and that is what must be changed.
We know that an IDF facility actually has a lot of damage to it. I believe it was one of the buildings torched. There was a report, Israeli media report, that says the damage, I believe, is going to cost millions of dollars just to repair. It was a pretty large facility inside of the West Bank. Talk to me about the reaction that Israeli officials have about this violence inside of the West Bank. Are you surprised by their reaction, or is it something that you support?
I'm not surprised at all. I think we've seen really from wall to wall the condemnation of these acts, from the left wing, which is not surprising, but also to the right wing. Minister Smotrich, Minister Ben-Gvir, condemning these actions, saying that there are red lines that must not be crossed in any circumstances, and attacking IDF soldiers, attacking military installations that are there for defending the lives of the Jewish population in Judea and Samaria and the Palestinians, is something which shouldn't be allowed and needs to be dealt with, as I said before, with the full force of the law. And that's really the call that we've seen. We need to see more involvement of Israel's police, more involvement of the Israel Security Agency, to ensure that this very, very small rotten apple doesn't affect the rest of the lives of the people living in Judea and Samaria.
You yourself live inside of Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank. Can you talk to me about what life is typically like there, what your community achieves to do in terms of living in that part of the area?
So firstly, I can say that based on my professional experience, that the Israelis that live in Judea and Samaria are the most law-abiding group of people that we have in the country. That's based on how many criminal files are opened every year per capita. In Judea and Samaria, it's the lowest of all different districts within the country. Thereafter, we have people who are contributing to all walks of life, all walks of society, whether it be the high-tech side, whether it be NGOs, whether it be members of Knesset, really everything within the judiciary as well, law enforcement, IDF. There is really a substantial contribution of the Jewish population in Judea and Samaria. Most of that population, I would say, probably as high as 99.99% of the population lives peacefully with its Arab neighbors. I myself, as is well known, I live in the settlement of Efrat. We share our local supermarket, not only with the settlements around us, but also with the local Arab communities, with Hebron in the south, with Bethlehem in the north, with Bet Fajar just down the road. And everybody comes together to do their shopping in the local supermarket. And that's the coexistence that you see on a daily basis. And then suddenly what really catches the news all the time, unfortunately, predominantly the international news, are these acts of violence committed by this small group of people who don't represent anyone else apart from themselves. And that really does bring about a very warped picture of what's going on. That's our reality in Judea and Samaria, trying to live together peacefully with everyone, avoiding the Palestinian terrorism on the one hand, and now, unfortunately, the Jewish terrorism on the other.
Now, Maurice, we just have a few minutes left, but of course you also work for the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. I want to move the conversation a little bit towards what's happening inside of Gaza. It seems as if there's momentum building. There could be a ceasefire or hostage deal at some point soon. I think everyone's just crossing their fingers at this point. There is an end to this war. It's almost been 2 years at this point. What is your take about the current state of what you're hearing from officials, specifically President Trump, about something that might happen within the next week in terms of a deal?
So I think the understanding in Gaza is that Israel has achieved much of its goals. We set out with 3 goals to start with. to destroy Hamas militarily, to destroy Hamas's civilian governance, and to free the hostages. Starting with the hostages, obviously, you can look at the glass as half empty, or as very empty, or as half full, or very full. Out of the 254 hostages that we started with, we've now got the number down to just 50, and we have to do everything that we can in order to bring about the freeing of those hostages. Hamas militarily is pretty much destroyed. Hamas's civilian governance is now being finally undermined by the switch of the provision of the humanitarian aid via the UN organizations and Hamas to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And Hamas is really seeing its last grip on the Gaza Strip slipping through its fingers as that whole mechanism changes. This is the time I think everyone is sick of the war. Everyone is seeing possibly the diminishing returns of the continued military presence and the operations there. And now is the time to make a switch. But the switch needs to be, and I think Prime Minister Netanyahu possibly referred to this in his speech, saying that it's now time to rescue the hostages, not to wait for them to be released, but to actively go out and secure their release. Let's finish this. We know where most of the hostages are, and we need to carry out whatever military operations are to bring about their release. Unfortunately, sometimes that means not pleasant consequences. When Nachshon Wachsman was kidnapped over 2 decades ago, we sent in the Israeli forces to try and release him. Unfortunately, it didn't end well. We've seen greater successes as part of the war in Gaza, and we hope that every one of those successes will be translated to bring back every single one of the hostages. But we need to make sure that we get back the hostages now at whatever price it really does take.
We have about a minute left. I just want to hear your take on this. Rescued versus release. How realistic is it to rescue these hostages? These families have warned that it could put the lives of these hostages in jeopardy if there is a rescue operation that could be underway. What is your take on that?
So the premise of that idea is that we can ever come to a negotiated settlement with Hamas, which will bring about the release of all of the hostages. That is just a lie. Let's put it on the table. Hamas will never rest free all of the hostages. They are their insurance policy, and therefore Israel needs to just move forward, ignore Hamas, and do everything it can operationally to bring about the freeing of the hostages. That is the only way. The longer they stay in captivity, that endangers their lives, not the IDF operations that are going to be enacted in order to bring about their release.
Maurice, thank you so much for joining us and for being with us. I think you offer really important perspectives inside of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, but also what's happening inside of Gaza. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Randy.
As I mentioned before, we are continuing to follow all of the news that is happening in real time. We've been covering the new remarks that Prime Minister Netanyahu made about rescuing the hostages. We've heard some of his critics actually be surprised that for the first time he's putting the hostages before the military objectives in terms of what our analysts have actually said. They believe that a lot of these objectives have actually been reached, militarily destroying Hamas and their capabilities at this point. You can see some of this footage inside of Gaza on your screen right now. We're also covering, what else is happening inside of Gaza as the war continues. We know that a large evacuation order was actually ordered yesterday inside of northern Gaza. We had strong remarks from the IDF Arabic spokesperson talking about how Hamas is basically holding their own people here. But these are all of the latest developments we are continuing to follow in real time. Thanks so much for joining us here on ILTV on the hour as we continue to provide you real live updates of what is happening here in Israel as they happen in real time. Thanks so much for joining us, and make sure you follow us at the top of the next hour. See you soon.